It took a while for Michael to come to his senses. After opening his eyes, he did not immediately understand where he was. Only after looking around more closely did he realize that he was inside the cardiology department of a local hospital. His body was attached to dozens of wires that kept him alive. Michael grimaced and tried to sit up in order to change position. But before he was able to do this, a doctor came into his room. Giving Michael a cursory glance, the doctor smiled contently and remarked with pride in his voice, "Congratulations, sir. The transplant was successful and your life is no longer in danger. The donor heart was the perfect match for you. Even with relatives, such compatibility is not guaranteed, and here we are dealing with complete strangers. That's amazing." Michael gathered what was left of his strength and lifted his head to examine the left side of his chest. It was really happening. It wasn't a dream. Evidence of this was a thick layer of gauze that covered the sutures. Michael gave a forced smile and asked, "Mr. Parker, sir, who was my donor?" The doctor frowned, thinking that the question sounded somewhat strange. Nevertheless, he answered, "Actually, that information is not usually disclosed. But if you really need to know, there is a way to find out the donor's details. Of course, it has to be a secret. You can count on my discretion." Michael hurried to reassure the doctor. The doctor smiled, then wished the patient a speedy recovery and left the room. Michael breathed a sigh of relief and once again tried to get into a comfortable position. At that point, all he needed to do was get used to his new heart, which seemed to be working like clockwork. Despite having turned 45 earlier that year, Michael Thompson continued to feel like the same young romantic that he was in his younger years. Back then, he didn't have heart problems, and his entire life was ahead of him. It just so happened that Michael's congenital heart disease was discovered too late. The first signs of disease appeared only 5 years ago. Since then, the businessman took it one day at a time. His parents did everything in their power to ensure that by the time he graduated from the university, their son would have a solid startup capital. In turn, Michael did not let them down and put a lot of effort into the development of his family business. In those years, the young businessman put his personal life aside and devoted all of his time to work. Of course, while at university, Michael dated several young women. His most serious relationship was with a young woman named Rebecca Dawson. At first, the two students hardly noticed each other. They had no idea that in the very near future, their life would take a very unexpected turn. Everything changed after a Thanksgiving celebration, when the students decided to have a big party. There was loud music and a huge bowl of punch that allowed the young people to have a lot of fun. That's when Michael decided to ask Rebecca to dance. He did not know that she already had a secret admirer who was very protective of her. Spencer Matthews turned out to be a very jealous man who was head over heels for Rebecca. Carefully watching Michael, Spencer was ready to charge at him with his fists. What's most interesting is that Rebecca did not consider her and Spencer to be a couple and did not see a point in having a relationship with him. Michael was a very nice guy with incredible charisma and intelligent eyes. The puny, glasses-wearing, and deeply insecure Spencer paled in comparison. Despite all that, he still tried to have a frank conversation with Michael. But it was a futile attempt. Michael and Rebecca became friends, which then quickly grew into something more. Everyone who knew them personally thought that they were a beautiful and happy couple. Things would have continued to go well if it weren't for Michael's parents, who did not like their son's girlfriend the moment they saw her. They had long ago found a match for Michael, a profitable union that would strengthen their position in business. "Mom, I love Rebecca. She's the only one I want and need," Michael continued to insist. But his parents were not persuaded. Ultimately, Michael and Rebecca's relationship ended as suddenly as it began. At first, they simply started seeing each other less. Then they stopped calling each other and eventually began leading completely separate lives. In the end, Spencer asked for Rebecca's hand and dragged her down the aisle. Michael, on the other hand, married the daughter of an influential businessman. Together, they had a son named Kevin. Everyone thought that Michael's marriage to Amanda was happy, an image of an ideal and prosperous family. In reality, Michael did not love his wife. He lived with her more out of obligation than desire. Deep down, he was still devoted to Rebecca, who left an open wound in his heart. Most likely, Amanda suspected that her husband did not really have feelings for her. She was a calm and accepting woman who chose not to draw too much attention to this fact and make it the subject of fights. To Michael's credit, he never tried to find Rebecca and rekindle their relationship after the breakup. He heard about her marriage to Spencer and that they had a daughter who was about the same age as his son, Kevin. After achieving financial independence, Michael moved to another part of the city, which minimized the possibility of running into Rebecca. He plunged into the turbulent waters of running a business and did everything in his power to make his parents proud. Michael earned his first million at the age of 30, which was a source of incredible pride for his father. Michael, however, was somewhat ambivalent about wealth and never sought to worship money or power. He had a somewhat ironic outlook on life and dreamed of finding the kind of happiness that he read about in his favorite adventure novels. Unfortunately, trouble came from where it was least expected. It all started when Amanda's annual medical examination revealed signs of a horrible disease. Of course, things did not seem so terrible at first, and Michael was sure that his money could work miracles. But when, after many sessions of chemotherapy and long-term drug treatment, Amanda did not get better, Michael understood that he needed to prepare for the worst. Kevin had just turned 10 when his mother became too sick to leave the hospital. All this served as proof that money cannot buy health or happiness. Despite all his money, Michael felt like a hopeless boy lost in the stormy waters of the ocean in an old boat. Even though Michael never truly loved Amanda, he was ready to give up all of his money for the sake of her health. Averting the doctor's eyes, Michael hoped that one day a miracle would happen and his wife would get better. Amanda died on the first day of spring, when the sun's gentle rays gave Michael false hope that the outcome of his wife's treatment would be successful. Fate's cruelty affected Michael so much so that he even temporarily left the family business, plunging into a deep sadness and mourning after his wife's funeral. During their marriage, he got so used to Amanda that even though he was not passionately in love with her, he still considered her to be the closest person in his life. At first, Michael visited the cemetery almost every week. He talked to his late wife for long periods of time, telling her about their son and his success in school. "You'll see, Kevin will be a worthy successor and will surpass me in literally everything," said Michael. Time flew by imperceptibly. Days turned into months and months into years. Gradually, the pain from losing his wife became less acute. In order to recover from the severe shock, Michael worked with a psychologist for quite a long time. It was the doctor who helped Michael deal with the feelings of severe despair. It seemed that Michael was finally going to be able to focus on running his business and teaching his son everything he knew. That would have been the case if Michael had not been diagnosed with a heart defect. Why it wasn't discovered earlier remained a mystery to the doctors. Of course, Michael sometimes experienced small heart pains, but it was so insignificant that the businessman mostly ignored it. Perhaps it was somewhat reckless behavior, but Michael was not one to rush to the hospital for every small thing. But when Michael started to feel really poorly, he realized that his life would never be the same again. The most shocking thing was that despite having a lot of money, Michael nevertheless had to wait for the heart donor for a long time. By the time the surgery finally became possible, Michael was already preparing for the worst. And now, lying on a hospital bed, Michael was thanking the Lord for his help. Everything happened so fast that the businessman did not even understand what happened. He simply received a call from the hospital and was informed that an organ he needed appeared in the transplant database. "I wonder who donated it to me, whose death saved my life," Michael thought as he lay on the hospital bed. The day after Michael's surgery, his son Kevin visited him at the hospital. Kevin had just turned 23. He looked at his father worriedly, took his hand, and said, "I'm so glad that everything went well. The doctor said that you will get better and will live to 100 with your new heart." Michael smiled and gave a dismissive wave. "Come on, what do I need to live to 100 for? The only thing I need is time to teach you everything I know and hand over the reins of the company. Then I can rest." Trying not to tire his father out too much, Kevin talked about how things were going at the company. He didn't mention that profits have halved since he became ill. Looking at his son's worried face, Michael smiled and remembered himself when he had just taken over the reins of the family company many years ago. The recovery period was very slow. By the time Michael was finally discharged, he was bored out of his mind. To Michael's great joy, Donald Parker gave him all the donor's information. Running his eyes over the sheet of paper containing his savior's information, Michael suddenly turned pale and involuntarily took 2 steps back. "What's wrong? Do you feel bad?" the cardiac surgeon asked worriedly. "Everything's fine. I thought I saw something," whispered Michael. The thing was that the donor's name was familiar to him. Moreover, this person played a big part in the businessman's past. Seeing Kevin, Michael tried to pull himself together and forced himself to smile. He did not want to upset his son, who was incredibly happy about his discharge from the hospital. The data that the surgeon provided contained the following information. Spencer Matthews, plumber, worked for a construction company, died in a car accident. He decided to become an organ donor 3 years ago. Michael knew right away that it was the very Spencer with whom he fought over Rebecca. Ignoring Kevin's words, the businessman sank into agonizing thoughts. He couldn't believe that fate could deliver such surprises. Of course, he and Spencer were never enemies, but it was also impossible to call them friends. It just so happened that they were rivals who loved the same woman, and she ended up marrying only one of them. And now, after his death, Spencer gifted Michael a new life. Of course, Michael understood that it was just a coincidence and that anyone could have been in his place. On the other hand, Michael felt that there was something mystical about the whole situation. On the way home, Michael told his son what he had learned about the donor. As expected, the news had a certain effect on Kevin. "Of course, it's very curious. I remember your stories about Spencer, with whom you clashed during your university days. It was so long ago. If you want, we can go visit his relatives just to meet them, or maybe offer them some kind of help," Kevin suggested with a carefree smile. At that moment, Michael's donated heart began to beat faster. To his surprise, he gasped and clutched the left side of his chest, which scared his son very much. "Dad, are you feeling ill? Maybe we should take you back to the hospital." "No, son, everything's fine. I'm just not used to all my heart's new capabilities. After all, I used to live in constant fear that I wouldn't wake up the following morning," Michael reassured his son. Kevin's suggestion was stuck in his head. Michael felt that it was absolutely necessary for him to visit Rebecca and say how sorry he was. Of course, he had nothing to do with Spencer's death, and anyone could have become his donor. Not knowing what to do, Michael went to bed as soon as he arrived home. An inexplicable sense of guilt tormented him. It made him think more and more about Spencer, whose life was cut short so suddenly. An inner voice begged Michael not to rush things and wait some more time. But Michael felt otherwise. The very next morning, he asked whether Kevin wanted to visit Rebecca. Of course, Michael understood that this meeting was unlikely to change anything in his life. But nevertheless, he was feeling incredibly uplifted. It seemed as if the donor's heart was pointing the way for its new owner like a compass. Michael and Kevin found the house they were looking for pretty quickly. As he left the cozy car, Michael felt his heart start to beat fast from excitement. Mustering up the courage, Michael went up to the front door and rang the doorbell. At first, there was no reaction, which made Michael question his decision to make the trip. To Michael's surprise, a young woman of about 25 opened the door. She had gray eyes and a mop of hair the color of coffee beans. "Good afternoon, can I help you?" asked the stranger. Kevin became visibly shy in front of the beautiful young woman and looked up at his father, involuntarily looking for support. "Hello, miss. We're looking for Rebecca Matthews," Michael said, stammering over every word. The young woman smiled at the visitors pleasantly, after which she turned around and shouted, "Mom, they're here for you." At that moment, someone's footsteps were heard from inside the house. Michael got visibly tense and goosebumps ran down his spine. Soon, Rebecca appeared from behind her daughter. To Michael's surprise, she hadn't changed much over the years. Her eyes still sparkled, and the dimples on her cheeks made Michael feel tenderness in his heart. "Michael, what are you doing here?" Rebecca exclaimed in surprise. The businessman suddenly became nervous, after which he replied, "I'm sorry I didn't call earlier. I know that it sounds crazy, but your late husband's heart is beating in my chest." Now it was Rebecca's daughter's turn to be surprised. Kevin was the first to come to his senses. he suggested that everyone go inside the house to continue the conversation in a more comfortable environment. Soon, all four of them were sitting at the kitchen table, drinking delicious tea that Rebecca's daughter, Monica, made. Not knowing what to say in such situations, Michael summarized the main events of his life over the years. He spoke about the death of Amanda and his serious heart condition. While Michael talked to Rebecca, Kevin couldn't look away from Monica. After learning that shortly before his death, Spencer took out a bank loan to repair their old house, Michael pledged to pay it off. Never before in his life did the businessman feel so sorry for his former rival. Kevin and Monica decided to give Michael and Rebecca some privacy. They headed outside where they sat down on a bench and began to chat about different things. After about an hour and a half, Michael left the house and headed towards the car. Taking this as a cue, Kevin politely said goodbye to Monica and hurried after his father. But before leaving, he asked whether she would be interested in seeing him again. On the way back, Michael did not say a word. It was evident from his facial expression that he was still thinking about the visit. Kevin, on the other hand, was thinking only about when he could see Monica again. The following day, Kevin, as promised, met up with Monica in the city park. The young people laughed heartily, fed squirrels, ate ice cream, and rode on the swings till they felt dizzy. After that memorable afternoon, the young people began to see each other almost every day. Michael felt somewhat uncomfortable. It was difficult for him to come to terms with the fact that receiving the donor heart made him unwittingly become part of Rebecca's family. Michael fulfilled his promise and paid off Spencer's loan. Still, he continued to speak with Rebecca and visit her almost every day. What's most interesting is that, at the same time, Kevin continued seeing Monica, with whom he was deeply in love. When Rebecca found out about this, she could not hold back her tears. Life can be so crazy sometimes. Once upon a time, we were close, and now they are repeating our mistake, whispered Rebecca. Why a mistake? Personally, I'm not against Monica and Kevin's relationship. Michael replied. Actually, everything isn't lost for us either, he continued. Looking at Michael, Rebecca saw something that made her heart beat with excitement. Only then did she realize that all those years, Michael continued thinking about her. It just so happened that Michael proposed on the same day as his son. Of course, this was such a rare coincidence, but that's exactly what happened. Michael was certain that the right path was shown to him by the donor's heart, whose former owner, just like him, loved Rebecca more than life itself. Kevin and Monica had 3 children who brightened the lives of their parents and grandparents and filled it with meaning. At the same time, they have not forgotten Spencer and visit his grave almost every week. Michael continues to apologize to his former rival, who unwittingly saved his life and gave him a chance to become a happy family man.